Welcome back to Heads and Tails. I'm Henry Faber. I'm one of the co-founders here at Oppidum Education, and I'm really pleased today to have Lindsey with me from Magic Breakfast. She is the CEO. She's leading a national charity that believes that no child or young person in the UK should be too hungry to learn, and I think we can all get behind that. Magic Breakfast is focused on ending morning hunger as a barrier to education now and for good. I think I'm right in saying that Lindsey was previously managing director of Street League, and she won a UK Women of the Future award back in 2017. Before that, she was a founding board member and the chair of Homeless Football Association, which reminds me of that great Bill Nye film I'm going to have to ask you about. And it's a national organisation supporting the lives of homeless and socially excluded people in England, but through football. Lindsey, what a spread of experience, and we're really excited to have you. A big privilege. So welcome to Heads and Tails.
Thank you, Andrew. It's great to join you.
Thank you. You know from our conversations that we are mad about all things mentorship and mentors. So makes sense to ask you, do you have a mentor? Any thoughts on that?
I mean, I have loads of mentors. I think mentoring can come in lots of different shapes and forms. So there's always the opportunity to learn and to pick others' brains and take on from their experiences and their wisdom. I think especially since joining Magic Breakfast, the insight and experience of head teachers who I visit, really understanding the impact of that breakfast club at the start of the day and how that flows through the school day for those children. But also as I've progressed in my career, mentors from both the business and the charity world, understanding, how do you lead, how do you motivate, how do you galvanize a team in an organization, and also kind of the wider world. So there are definitely too many mentors to credit, but I definitely champion them and, also like to help where I possibly can as well.
Do you think you were sort of aware of that first mentor that became an important influence in your life? Was it an obvious moment, that kind of formalized mentorship?
No, it definitely wasn't. I look back and realize I had mentors before I heard of mentoring, if that makes sense. So I was really fortunate to get a mentor through my time at Street League when I first joined. We had a funder who provided that as part of the support and funding package. All of the charity leadership team got an official mentor. And then that was when I understood, I suppose, the idea of what a mentor is versus coaching or sponsorship or sounding board. But looking back before then, I had a lot of mentors. I played a lot of sport growing up. And so thinking about my coaches and older, more senior players or managers in football and rugby, which were the two sports I loved, I definitely had a lot of mentoring and benefited greatly from it.
Nice. Well, whether it's a sporting anecdote or not, I'd love to hear a bit more about you as a child or a teenager. Is there some anecdote you can tell us that gives us a sense of who the youngest version of Lindsey was?
I think probably the youngest version of Lindsey is not too dissimilar in some worrying ways, I guess, maybe to adult Lindsey.
Consistent.
I am consistent. My report cards all said chatty when she gets bored. And I do have an innate and kind of, unstoppable impatience, I suppose. And when I get frustrated or when I see things that I'm not happy about, I will act to try and fix them. So when I was 14, I rather, I guess, impetuously took over running one of our youth football clubs. So I was 13, the players were 10, and, ran it as though in my head, I was Kevin Keegan as a Newcastle United supporter of the 90s. That was my hero to look for, and very few, sadly, female role models in the sport and football space in particular. So it was, I think, always just getting involved. And I grew up on a small island on the east coast of Canada, Prince Edward Island. Nobody will probably have heard of it unless they've read Anne of Green Gables or have a particular passion for potatoes, both of which we were and are famous for. And so it was a smaller community. You could really get involved in things. So our youth club was going to be shut down. And I was kind of first in the queue to find out, well, what can we do as young people to stop that from happening? And it was because of the cost of maintaining and cleaning it. So just, organized a rota, got a group of young people and we cleaned it, and committed as a group to keeping it tidy and well maintained so that took that pressure off, the adults who were cleaning up after us, that type of thing. So
sounds like there was hardcore CEO early experience going on and social action already. So
Yeah.
clearly, I'm sure your parents weren't surprised what kind of a lifestyle and career you grew into. That's fascinating.
I think
Or
my
were they?
parents, well, I think my parents and probably my siblings all also suffered from that slight kind of, I'm described as the family office manager. Despite we live across the world and despite being a middle child, very odd behaviors for a middle child kind of stereotype. But yeah, have
Agreed.
always organized and coordinated everybody, kept them all, to time.
Excellent. Well, lucky team at Magic Breakfast. I'm sure they're lucky to have you. Your career, I mean, working in charities in particular, I'm sure not always an easy thing to be doing. Perhaps two questions in one. A tough moment that you'd reflect upon that's really given you the experience or given you some great learning, and a best moment too, maybe a peak or a natural Everest you're happy to talk about.
So I think the toughest moments, as you kind of alluded to in the charity sector, are when the resource and the need don't align. And that happens a frustratingly frequent, kind of time. So at Magic Breakfast, just as we were seeing a rising level of need because of the rising cost of living and the upward pressure on food prices, we were also experiencing a 20% increase in the costs of the charity. And so just as we wanted to increase our services, we need to either reduce them or, kind of find efficiencies to keep them going at a maintained level. And I've had another experience when I was at Street League. We were quite regionally kind of, I suppose, supported from a funding perspective. And so you'd have areas of greater need and deprivation that didn't have the funders of the local economy and businesses to support the operations, the employability programs in that local area. And so you just saw the perpetuating of disadvantage and inequality. And it was really difficult as a charity leader responsible for keeping the whole organization, financially sustainable and keeping the whole show on the road, as it were, to have to take decisions in certain areas that felt so counterproductive and counterintuitive to the impact in the there and then, but recognizing and holding on to the fact that it was really important to the charity's long-term sustainability and trying as much as possible to take the learnings from the difficulties as well. So thinking about what silver linings were there from COVID and lockdown, another really difficult time. So that's, I think, always been my two things that I hang on to in difficult work situations are I can do this well so that it has a lesser detrimental impact on the people and the things that this is affecting, and also to learn through it so that, maybe in the future something like this or exactly like this doesn't need to be done again, or we can better mitigate or reduce the likelihood. In terms of the best moment, I've been so fortunate. There have been lots and lots of them, but I think actually the one that stood out when I was thinking about this question was seeing the long-term impact of things that you did that you didn't realize were actually making a difference. So when we first set up the Homeless FA, we took 10 men, 10 women to the Homeless World Cup in Mexico City. It was actually possibly more dramatic and stressful than Bill Nye suggested it was in the Netflix film. We watched it and thought, we were definitely much more stressed out than any of them look. They look far too kind of, composed. Where's their risk assessment? I don't think they've thought about this. But with that first cohort, one of the young female players that I really connected with, she'd been overcoming some significant challenges and had found or reconnected with the love of football, which, as I say, is a sport that I loved as well. So we kind of had a mutual affection for the sport. And she was rough sleeping at the time, struggling to get into any training or employment opportunities. Went to the program with the Homeless FA and went into training and employment support through her homelessness provider, one of our partners, and lost contact and connection. And then that was, goodness, 14 years ago. And then 2 months ago, I was walking into a coffee shop and I saw her there, sat with her partner, their 2 children, colouring, sitting. She was working away and just went over to say hello and, reconnect. And she was able to remember the exact moment that we met, the football pitch we were stood on, which was just down the road from that coffee shop that we were then, stood in, and just reflecting on where we both were. And it was a really lovely moment of reflecting on her journey, but also my journey. I was a program officer at the National Homelessness Charity, Homeless Link, and with some slightly, again, over enthused kind of need to make a difference, setting up a charity in my spare time at the same time. And it was just really lovely to reflect on that distance traveled, our shared starting point, and where we were at that moment, having a flat white and chatting away. So I think that's probably, that will be a standout moment for life for me.
Amazing. So the summary is that was a standout moment, but that Bill Nye's film does not give a standout appearance
No,
of the drama and high stress, high stakes environment that you were working in.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, you would think the opposite, which is what we expected. This is going to be so, Hollywood. It's going to kind of
You must have been
misrepresent.
looking forward to the film though when you saw the trailer. I would have thought you'd be like,
It was.
or
I think there were
dread.
mixed emotions. Mixed emotions. Yeah, it's you know that it will never quite capture your experience, and I think there are so many different experiences that you see and can have at the Homeless World Cup through any sporting environment and event. So we went in, fairly aware that it wasn't going to really please anyone, but.
Slightly off topic, but you've worked across very different charities with very different needs. Has there been a sort of common thread or something that you feel has stood you well across those different environments that sort of, enabled the work you've done to be consistent despite the variance in challenges that you face?
I think it's probably less of a thread across and more of a thread through, which is it's about, for me, kind of how can I make a greater difference. My first job was actually in international development when I first came out of university, having done my physics degree and realizing, I actually don't really like science, and I definitely don't want to be a physicist, and moved into the charity sector, international development, and then reflected I wanted to make more of a difference and an impact in my own community. And we'd moved to London, to the UK. So wanted to do something at home, worked in homelessness, and realized, gosh, people are ending up in this situation because of, a gap in the qualifications, the employability support that they get as they transition from school into the world of work and adulthood. So moved into employability, and then working at Street League and seeing 16, 18, 22-year-olds coming to programs who had been excluded from school or not had a great experience in school. When I heard about Magic Breakfast and that idea of creating a sense of belonging and welcoming and, care for a child right at the start of the school day, every single day, the importance of education is maybe a theme that I would recognize from my work and from my career. But I always joke that I'll probably end up in some sort of like antenatal charity at some point.
I was going to say, you're going like this, younger and younger. Yeah.
Exactly.
But that spread and that variety must have made for a fascinating experience through your career to date. We love sharing content with people. And you might be a reader, maybe it's books, or you watch a lot of films or podcasts. I'm very open to all manner of content, but I would love to hear what you'd recommend for us. And it can be focused in on what you do professionally or totally aside from that. So feel plenty of flexibility there.
I mean, I am a podcast devourer. I think as somebody who lives in London and kind of commuting, traveling to and from meetings, being able to put my headphones on and listen to a podcast, as I cling to a pole in the Central Line or Northern Line, is just good for the soul. Most of those are political, but I think I'm probably a reader in terms of where I find, kind of real time and peace for myself. And inevitably I join any book club that's going. And I think my favorite book that it surprised me, it connected with me really clearly, was a book called The Chief Joy Officer. And it's a professional development book, I guess you'd call it. But it was the idea that so many workplaces, so many ways of working, decision-making, leadership, policies, systems are based on fear. And actually the best way to overcome and to, I guess, move fear out of the workplace is through joy. So it's, that sense of how do you create a sense that people are curious and excited and, happy to not only fail, but share with people. Oh gosh, I really messed up on this, and this is what I've learned and this is what I found out. And isn't it surprising that, we intended this, but the consequence was that. And creating an environment and a culture where people are openly and actively seeking learning, and sharing that is, for me, a really kind of fundamental piece of joy. And so this book talks about how every organization needs a chief joy officer, which I think would be a bit too cringy, even for me to retitle myself a chief joy officer. But it's something I've always really held on to and thought about. We spend so much time, I spend so much time at least, at work, and many of us do, especially in the education sector and settings. So how do we make sure that that workplace isn't full of the feeling of fear, but the feeling of joy? And I think we'd all be better off if that were more universal.
I'd love to change my LinkedIn to CJO. I think that would be great. Opperden, co-founder in CJO. I do feel like that sometimes. You got to be the hype person all the time too, and that's part of the joy, isn't it? And making sure there's enough of that and not too much of the opposite. That's a lovely suggestion. I'm going to check out that book. Thank you. Nice to hear that you devour podcasts on the Central Line. We'll keep an eye out for each other at some point very soon. And I've had several people say to me, actually, I hate podcasts. I'm so sorry to say that while on your podcast. So it was refreshing to hear that we've got someone who does like podcasts. Yeah.
My goodness. Those people don't say that to me. I think I'm probably too upfront with my love of podcasts. They think, well, she's a losing battle. We'll just leave her in her own world.
An unpopular opinion or something a little controversial. It can be sneaky, it can be personal, it can be professional, something you're happy to stand up on a soapbox and say, I'm proud of thinking this, even if you disagree.
Well, I have many possibly controversial thoughts, but one is very specific to Magic Breakfast. And I feel as though this is a significant moment for any of my team who are listening. I believe that hash browns are a good thing in breakfast. That statement could cost me, the kind of friendship, loyalty, connectedness of half of my organization. There's a significant split at Magic Breakfast, and I'd love to know whether you think hash browns belong in breakfast or not. What are your views on that?
I'm a big hash brown guy.
Okay.
They remind me of an English breakfast without a hash brown. What is that?
Okay. Well,
so I'm a fan. I'd like to know why that's unpopular though. Is that just a taste thing, or is there some kind of financing or funding thing behind? A hash brown's very expensive.
it's nothing to do with that. It's actually quite I would suggest, bizarre kind of conviction view that the hash browns do not belong in breakfast.
Okay.
And I think there's possibly a little bit of a UK spread in terms of what a full English is defined as in London differs to what it is defined as in the north of England. So I'll invite you to a Magic Breakfast all staff meeting, and you can be, judged and celebrated in equal measure for your hash brown taste. And then I think my slightly broader controversial view is, and it's been something, again, going back to my career that I've always held really close to my heart, is the fact that just because you mean to do a good thing or do good work doesn't necessarily mean you're not causing harm. And I think that's really important for the charity sector to remember and to think about and to recall. So, making sure that the impact of your work is driven by and informed by effective, theory of change, evidence, research, objective reviews and data, and not solely based on good intentions, nice stories, and some anecdotes. I think sometimes we're a little bit too quick in the charity sector to only talk about the success, and there's a bit of an arms race of, 90% of our participants did this, or, kind of these big headline statements, and we don't talk enough about the difficulties and the challenges. And if we're really addressing the most challenging issues in society, we should have some pretty epic failures at times and some pretty big learnings at times. And I don't think the charity sector as a whole always presents and talks about those as openly as we could and we should.
Lovely. I think that's a beautiful point. Don't need to say anything to that. Totally agree. Finally, last but not least, perhaps a piece of advice that you have for those in the sector. And I say the sector because there'll be teachers, but there'll also be those working for charities or in social impact. So any, lifelong piece of advice you'd like to share for us?
Be curious and stay curious. I think if we all go back to that first day at work when we were thinking, oh my goodness, what's this going to be? What am I going to learn? We need to hold on to that curiosity and that joy all the way through our career. And if you're struggling to find it, then take on something new, stretch yourself, go into that growth kind of mindset and zone, and be curious.
Very good. Love that. We should be curious as children. I think children are curious enough, actually. it's us adults that get it wrong. We lose our curiosity and our creativity. And I think you've said that very eloquently. Lindsey MacDonald, thank you so much. We are bang on 20 minutes. We've played to time. You've been thoughtful, pithy, humorous with your answers. A fascinating career trajectory for you, but also an organization now that needs all the amplification I think it can get. And really excited to see what happens with Magic Breakfast, whether it be with Oppidan or otherwise in the months to come. And really grateful for the time you shared with us today. So thank you.
Thanks, Henry. It was really nice to meet you.